Once upon a time, in the grimdark 90s, there was a very grimdark place filled with a whole host of really nasty things that thought they were the cock of the walk. There wasn't much a normal person could do, as they were seriously outclassed by the bloodsuckers, shape-changers, and witches. Everything seemed hopeless, or as a wise man once said,
"There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no man."
Until the 6th core book in the World of Darkness line came out, and suddenly all the helpless humans stood a fighting chance. Well, maybe. Enter Hunter the Reckoning, the game of trying to remove some of the grimness of the grimdark darkness of the grimdark 90s. For most, this game came too late, as the World of Darkness was already on its last legs. But is that a fair assessment? I'm Mr. Welch, here to remind you that 1, you lock the target, 2, you bait the line, 3, you slowly spread the net, and 4, you catch the man. Remember not to get those out of order. Hunter the Reckoning is the 6th core book in the World of Darkness line, released in 1999, the first core book written in the year of the Reckoning. This is 2 years after Changeling the Dreaming and concerns humans that have discovered the supernatural creatures of the world and have been given special powers to deal with them. There was a small army of people that brought this book to life, with Ken Cliff, Ed Hall, and Stuart Wheat getting the design credits, and about a dozen other names getting writing credits. Richard Thomas is the art director with a small army of artists credited. Alright, technicals are out of the way, it's time for the meat of the book. For many people, Hunter the Reckoning is a sign of the end times for the World of Darkness, or at least a sign that White Wolf was completely out of ideas. The indications were already there. Wraith and Changeling as games were discontinued. The entire game line seemed to be floundering, while the 3 core books of Vampire, Werewolf, and Mage were going strong. Nothing else seemed to stick. The quality of the books for many had dropped off, giving us poorly received splat books like Dirty Secrets of the Black Hand, though that was several years previous. In addition, the sheer number of splat books needed to play was getting ridiculous, as each new source book seemed to rewrite the last one. It's not a good time to introduce the book that was dedicated to killing the other characters. But here was Hunter. The World of Darkness already had numerous books about hunting the supernatural, starting with the famous Hunters Hunted, all the way back with Vampire First Edition, which gave a few tips and powers to humans looking to even the odds. The catch was, humans just weren't as good as the things they hunted. They had fewer stats, and those stats were capped at lower levels. Very few supernatural abilities were available to them. They were very fragile, and had few defenses against the things they hunted. Every faction had a human-centric book, but these humans always ended up with some supernatural element to them. Ghouls and kinfolk had powers related to vampires and werewolves, and the mage followers were open-minded enough to avoid paradox. There were books about the FBI Supernatural Squad, Project Twilight, the research group known as the Arcanum, the infamous Gypsies book, and the one that made hunting the things that go bump in the night plausible.
The Inquisition, what a show, the Inquisition, here we go.
Yeah, that one was my jam. But even if you had the backing of various groups like national governments, the Vatican, and the Lord God Almighty, you were still just a squishy human. Enter the Messengers. Hunter introduced these rather powerful creatures that suddenly showed up, revealed the existence of various supernatural creatures to people that were preyed upon by them, and for those that decided to fight back, imbued them with various abilities that even the odds. Kind of. These newly created hunters were called, wait for it, the Imbued, and they got all sorts of neat powers. They were still core human, so they had the reduced starting stats like the rest of us schlubs, but they did have virtues and edges. They also got second sight, meaning they were immune to any attempt to supernaturally change them or control them. The power didn't work if they were completely unaware, but that usually meant being unconscious or asleep. If they became aware of the attempt that they were being controlled, it immediately failed. It also let them immediately recognize supernatural creatures. Second sight was completely overpowered or absolutely useless, depending on how the storyteller envisioned it. It didn't have solid rules for all the different monsters out there, especially considering many of them skirted clear definitions. Mechanically, Hunter the Reckoning is in the World of Darkness system, so it uses the same D10 die pool as the rest. Character creation is priority assignment for stats and skills. You've got willpower, because this is a White Wolf product. The magical energy for Hunters is conviction. It does use the virtue system first introduced by Vampire with some serious changes. The human sidekicks for Hunters are bystanders. These were people offered the chance to hunt the spooky guys, but turned it down. They can still see the supernatural, but they have no powers past that. Those guys can be played, but then you're going back to Hunter's hunted levels of squishy. Like all the other World of Darkness games, there are divisions amongst the types of playable characters, like the clans and tribes. With Hunter, these are called creeds. They determine what your most important virtue is, and by extension, and by extension, what edges you can easily acquire. All of the creeds have their own particular weaknesses, and the ability to play well with others varies greatly. This is the World of Darkness we're talking about. The lone wolf edgelord guy is a time-honored tradition in this game line. There's always that one character that makes everybody's life difficult, especially the storyteller. Vampires had the Malkavians. For werewolves, it was the Get of Fenris. Mages couldn't trust the youth Thanatos. And for hunters, it was the Wayward.
Wow. What's wrong with me?
Basically, serial killing imbued with the notion that they now had an excuse to kill their prey, and the people that got between them and their prey, and the people too stupid to be standing close to the prey, and anybody staring at you after you've killed everybody in the first three categories. You know, that guy. There were a lot of people not happy with Hunter for a whole host of reasons. The video game was not one of them. The video game can go sit in the next room with a beer for this section. Everybody loved it. The Hunter video games were Gauntlet, only with ghouls and shotguns. If you can find a copy of this one on whatever format, check it out. It's actually pretty fun. Okay, where to begin on why this game got the flack it did when it first landed? I'll start with the biggest complaint, at least from my group, and that it was the oversimplification of the World of Darkness according to Hunter. I don't know if that criticism is fair, but it's unavoidable. By 1999, White Wolf had a deeply engaging storyline. The three primary games had detailed splat books for every single faction, including their enemies. And there were reams of history, legends, and secrets that had made the setting the classic that it is today. Now let's introduce a bunch of puny humans with special powers, but no knowledge of how monsters work. Worse, they couldn't just duplicate the rules from the big three games, so they just simplified them. They reduced the mage's legendarily complex magic system to a luck stat. Let that sink in. Hunter had to explore the supernatural types further in their splat books. This is World of Darkness, after all. I think they have a Mr. Welch splat book somewhere. It really wasn't fair for Hunter to be introduced so late in the series and have to keep up with everybody else. One of the major attractions for the World of Darkness was the enormous amount of crossover available, especially with some of the nicer creatures in the setting. Then you add in a book about hunting all those people down, and one that doesn't fill in the enormous background. And you get a product that seems rather out of place. There was no way you were going to fill in all the World of Darkness lore with Hunter. That just wasn't possible. I don't think they could have done a book that summarizes 8 years of writing into a coherent topic. It would have probably been done better far earlier in the line, or as a standalone product. It didn't help that this was going to be compared to Hunter's Hunter and
The Inquisition.
It's the equivalent of letting somebody enter the Daytona 500 30 laps down and expecting them to catch up. Hunter does work great against the bad guys of most of the other games. If you're going to pick this one up, you need to grab the monster books from the previous ones. And considering this one has a heavy conspiratorial bent, grabbing bad guys from Pentex or the Technocracy fits right in with no problems. But grab those splat books before you start your campaign so you don't have to backtrack on details. Unless you're playing a supernatural TV style campaign, you do need some consistency between the villains. Pick your bad guy, let the hunters learn about them, and don't change the lore because you found a new book. Nothing like changing what something is immune to mid-campaign because of a retcon.
Once again, things that could have been brought to my attention yesterday!
There is a rift in the White Wolf community over what's better, Hunter or Hunters Hunted, because turning human hunters into supernatural types flies in the face of people wanting to play the Frog Brothers, Bill Turner, professional adventurer, or Kolchak the Night Stalker. The edges are nice, but you aren't going to last long against a Lupus Arun Get of Fenris. Hunters were required to play it smart. They might have some awesome tricks, but they are pretty far down on the totem pole when it comes to throwing hands. Unless they were hunting Ventrue, because Second Sight shut down most of their abilities. And the look on their face was priceless. Despite all the art showcasing people running around like Blade, Captain Kronos, and Buffy Summers, getting into hand-to-hand combat with all the various nasty types will get you killed quickly. The game's art is highly misleading, and you should not be inspired by it. A major part of the theme of Hunter is the whole Nietzsche line about staring into the abyss. Hence the virtues that you have to pick at the start of the game. These are mercy, vision, and zeal. Each creed has a particular focus on a virtue, and the other virtues can never be higher than the associated one in your stats. Judges have a focus on vision, for example. So mercy and zeal can equal that stat, but they can never exceed it. Having high virtues gives you benefits to avoid losing your way, and lets you acquire higher powered edges. Having way too high of a virtue makes you obsessed with your current path. Too much vision and you lose interest in anything but trying to understand things.
This means something.
Mercy makes you think you can save everyone. And Zeal, you now spend your entire life trying to kill the wabbit. The more you go down the path, the greater the chance you lose yourself. Even the highest level edges follow this ideal. You can get them if you've maxed out your virtue, but they will consume you in the process. You can save the world, but you can't save yourself. And the core rulebook doesn't even give you rules on how to acquire the highest level edges. The creeds aren't as segregated as the traditions, clans, and tribes in terms of abilities. They all have a weakness like vampires or werewolves, but these are more philosophical in nature rather than a game mechanic. They can buy all the same edges as long as their virtues are high enough. The differences in willpower and conviction at the start will be balanced by freebie points and XP. An Avenger can pick up mercy edges just like a Martyr can, but the Martyr will have an easier time in terms of building towards it. That's the only real difference between the creeds. They don't get XP discounts like a mage or a werewolf would with their abilities. They aren't locked into special abilities at the start like a vampire is. Since there are only 3 virtues and multiple creeds, they don't even have limited access to edges. Creeds serve a similar purpose as character backgrounds, only giving you some mechanical differences and minor ones at that. Hunter has aged itself a bit with its focus on hunternet.org, a message board in-game that was the catalyst that tied all the different imbued together. When you got your powers, you got an invite to the message board. Only the hunters could find it if you typed in the address directly. Unless you were invited, you got a 404 error. And if you tried to read it from a hunter's computer, you'd still get the error message. It was run by the messengers, the beings responsible for giving the hunters their powers. What they were was never explained. They were part of the mystery of the setting. They served as info dumps and could activate hunters' edges if necessary, but other than being plot devices, they really didn't appear in most games. The biggest debate about Hunter is not the fact that it's a game about hunting down the other guys you've been playing for the last 8 years, but was it really necessary?
The Inquisition.
Was the last definitive guide to hunters before the Reckoning and did a smash-up job without edges. They only had 3 supernatural powers: True Faith, Hedge Magic, called Numina, and Psychic abilities. They could have just merged all the human books into a single core book with everything they needed to fight the supernaturals with just minor powers, faith, and shotguns.
This is my boomstick!
Okay, I've been tossing this around in my head since 1991. White Wolf always had balance issues. Something that was unavoidable with all the different monsters. Vampires were often described as nocturnal superheroes. X-Men with fangs. Werewolves were the hairy part of the damage roll. And mages rewrote the rules as they went along. Everybody had their own particular weaknesses, be it sunlight, holy water, silver, cold iron, fire, random passersby, but there was always one thing in particular that laid every one of them low. Double-aught buck. The pump-action shotgun was the closest thing players could get to a weapon of mass destruction, and it only cost 2 dots of resources. With a high accuracy and a whopping 12 dice of base damage, with multiple actions a turn, this thing could take down vampires, werewolves, hit marks, trolls, armored vehicles, fortified beach emplacements, warships, castles, antediluvians, and endangered species. Just take the -1 to your die pool for extra shots, and you were dishing out 60 dice of damage before you actually suffered a penalty to hit because of the +5 accuracy bonus, with a 12-gauge shotgun. You just had to survive the first attack of anything that swung at you, and because it was a single action from a firearm rather than multiple melee attacks, you quickly chewed through bruising, lethal, and aggravated damage on the target. I still remember Inquisitor Drake from our Gladius Day campaign, slam-firing a bloodsucker into chunky salsa with a Winchester 1897. Good times. Dias Volt, y'all. Regardless of where Hunter belongs in the World of Darkness, or even if it belongs in it at all, any campaign that's going to include other supernaturals will need to understand what's out there and how involved the characters are going to be in the grand scheme of things. Are they going to go all Punisher on werebears, or are they going to have the acceptable types they can be friends with? Remember, all hunters are counted as sleepers when it comes to magic, so they're not going to be hanging around many mages. They can't be turned into vampires, and the nastier Pentex spirits can't affect them either. They are, however, particularly vulnerable to regular security measures, so while the Syndicate mage can't whip out his plasma pistol without repercussions, they can whip out their super shiny custom-built fully automatic shotgun, or just call the cops, who also have shotguns. Vampires can also call 911, and a lot of them have it on speed dial. Gru all have human forms, and more than a few of them know how long rifles work. The best hunter campaigns are going to be the ones that require more research than combat. Players will need to track down more experienced hunters for their knowledge.
One thing about living in Santa Carla I never could stomach. All the damn vampires.
For new creature types, they're going to have to look for old tomes or folk tales of what their weaknesses are. If they can actually make friends with some of the nicer monster types, they might be able to call in the cavalry if the bad guys turn out to be black spiral dancers or worse. Hunters are the squishiest of the 6 core supernaturals by a large margin. Mages, while still human, can rewrite reality to avoid wounds or dodge bullets. Hunter works best in a low-powered game, often with a monster of the week. Rare creatures like mummies or true Bruja should be reserved for a special session instead of a random encounter. Hunter the Reckoning never really found a home in World of Darkness, despite tremendous amounts of support. It was considered redundant by numerous players and added supernatural elements to a part of the game that was relatively light on them. There were a few poorly received books, like the Middle East book, which had a noticeable author bias regarding Saudi Arabia versus Iran, which didn't help. For the best results, you needed other setting books, which at this point in the game numbered in the hundreds. It worked best as a standalone, and even then many preferred the original Hunters Hunted. The worst part was it came out relatively late in the meta plot, meaning Hunter was already running out of time when it was released. The World of Darkness ended in 2004, so Hunter barely got 5 years of support compared to everybody else. You can still get all the books easily, they're all on POD. Okay, next Mad Musings, I'm going to go back to the warm embrace of Artel Saurian with Mechton, their stompy robot game taken straight from all the Japanese cartoons. Until then, remember, be vowy, quiet.